High Court in Pretoria has reserved judgment in the application for leave to appeal a ruling on former Zambian President Edgar Lungu's burial. Last month, the same court unanimously ruled that the remains of Lungu be handed over to the government for repatriation. This followed a legal battle of more than 2 months between his family and the Zambian government. Lungu died in a South African hospital back in June. His family is blocking efforts to return his body to Lusaka, claiming the former statesman did not want his successor, Hakainde Chilema, involved in his funeral or even near his remains. Let's bring in Zambian historian, Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. In your knowledge, not only, of course, in Zambia, but generally speaking, have you heard of a case like this where a former president has died and there has been this battle between the family and the government over where their remains should be buried?
In the context of Zambia, there have been disputes with regard to the funerals of other former one president and a former president who died before. There was a dispute between the family and the government, for example, when Kenneth Kaunda, Zambia's founding president, died, about where he should be buried, because Kaunda had stipulated in his wish that he wished to be buried at his farm next to his wife. The Zambian government at the time, led by Edgar Lungu, who was president, insisted that he should be buried at Imbas Park, which the government has designated as the site for burials for later presidents or former presidents. There was a similar instance with Levi Mwanawasa, the president of Zambia, who died in 2008. Again, the family of the late president were left with a will of a video where Mwanawasa made it very clear that he wished to be buried at his farm in the event of his death. The Zambian government at the time, led by Rupia Banda, insisted that he must be buried at the current site where the government of President Hakainde Chilema are saying former President Lungu should be buried. So in the context of Zambia, this is not unusual. What is unusual is the fact that Lungu is the first former president who have died outside the country, because Kenneth Kaunda died in a Zambian hospital, so it was very easy to manage the dispute there. This time around, we have a situation where Lungu died in another country, and so there are concerns about which law applies when it comes to legal cases. It's Zambian law, it's African law, but also important is the fact that the family of Lungu, unlike the families of Kenneth Kaunda and Levi Mwanawasa, have not caved in to government demands. They have insisted that they are prepared to go all the way to enforce the wishes of the former president that his successor should not attend his funeral.
There is a certain irony, isn't it, when it comes to the case of Kenneth Kaunda and the fact that Edgar Lungu was the one who wanted him buried in the place designated for presidents.
That's correct. The Lungu administration, enforced its will against the family, because, of course, the family also was divided, unlike the Lungu family. But even at the time when Kenneth Kaunda died, there was no law that allowed the state to decide the place of burial for former president. You could argue that actually the state bulldozed its way, on that occasion. So many people feel that Lungu is getting a taste of his own medicine, taking into account how his own administration handled the case of former President Kaunda.
It's difficult to argue otherwise. I suppose the one thing that advocate Dimbeka Ncukaitobi, who's arguing on behalf of the Lungu family, his point is that Kenneth Kaunda died with the benefits of a president. Those presidential benefits were intact at the time of his death. And the difference between Kaunda and Lungu is that when Lungu died, his presidential benefits had been removed.
Yes, he's right in that sense. According to Zambian law, a state funeral is not a legal entitlement. So there's a distinction between a state funeral and a legal cost that the state covers in the event, legal expenses that the state covered in the event of death of my president. The state funeral in Zambia is an honor accorded by a sitting incumbent to people that he or she feels are worthy of that honor. It's not something that can be imposed if somebody, for example, doesn't wish to have it. And it's also something that, according to the current dispute, for example, ignores the point that if, for example, the family had buried Lungu elsewhere, they are entitled to go to the state and claim benefits as provided for in the law in terms of funeral expenses. The challenge is that at the time that Lungu died, he had returned to active politics, and the government had, based on that action, withdrawn all his state benefits. That's a major difference with Kaunda, because when Kaunda died, he was still enjoying the state benefits that are provided from a president, unlike in the case of Lungu. So the family is arguing that you can't show him love that you didn't show him in life, when he was alive. In fact, before he died, long before he came back to politics, the state had rejected his request to travel to South Africa for medical review, even at the time when this was a legal entitlement, because the law in Zambia is such that the former president is given an annual return ticket to a country of his choice, and medical insurance is covered as well. So Lungu was unwell and felt he needed to travel to South Africa in 2023 before he returned to active politics. The state declined that, and partly because of that, I think he was prompted to come back to active politics, which made him lose all his state benefits. Now, the bad blood between him and his successor, Kainde Hichilema, is partly a consequence of that, though there are other factors that explain that. So when he came to South Africa and told his family to say, look, if I die, I don't want this man to attend my funeral. It was partly in response to that treatment from the Zambian government. He felt the Zambian government had treated him unfairly and very badly, and for that reason made it very clear that his successor, if he died, should not attend his funeral. And that's really at the crux of this matter. The Lungu family was prepared to take his body to Zambia for burial, provided Hichilema pledged that he would not preside over the funeral. It was his refusal to publicly commit that undertaking that forced them to consider burying him in South Africa. And even though negotiations have been happening between the two parties, the outstanding issue revolves around that major concern. Hichilema is adamant that any discussions should be conducted, but he will not accept anything to the effect that he should stay away from the funeral. Lungu's family is also adamant that they are prepared to negotiate with Hichilema, with the government, provided Hichilema caves in to their request that he should not preside over this funeral.
What do you make of this, Dr. Sishuwa? Because, the fraught relationship between these two people goes back a very, very long time, to the election that Edgar Lungu won by a very narrow margin, to Hakainde Hichilema's imprisonment. Do you think that the current Zambian president is, I don't know, this is in the realm of speculation and maybe a bit like a soap opera, but even in death, that the sitting president is trying to prove a point?
I think there are two fundamental issues there to be said. One is that the relationship between these two was bad even before Hichilema became president. Lungu, when he was president of Zambia in 2016, he won a very disputed election in 2016. Hichilema felt that Lungu had stolen that election from him. And in the aftermath of the 2016 election, Hichilema and his party refused to recognize the presidency of Lungu, believing that it was illegitimate. That appeared to have affected Lungu very badly, to a point where in 2017, Lungu's government arrested Hichilema over a minor traffic offense, and they elevated that to treason charge. Hichilema spent 4 months in prison on a charge of treason, which should never have happened. So Lungu treated Hichilema extremely bad when Hichilema was in opposition, and that, I think, explains the genesis of the bad blood between the two. After Hichilema won the presidency in 2021, the Hichilema administration itself treated Lungu very badly. They prevented his free movement. Hichilema and his officials constantly spoke ill of the former president, and for that reason, he came back to politics seeking to unseat the incumbent at the next election. And then the government and the government supporters moved the courts to disqualify Lungu from standing in Zambia's election scheduled for next year. And that bad blood really is at the heart of this dispute. Now, what is very strange is that Hichilema's refusal to step aside and, say, designate somebody such as his vice president to preside over the funeral is really a matter of personal ego. You know, he loses nothing unless he has personal interest in the funeral by simply saying, listen, the dispute has really embarrassed the country, and I understand that if you don't want me there, I'm going to have to designate the vice president to preside over the state funeral, for example. We have seen this elsewhere. In the US, for example, when John McCain died in 2018, he had left clear instruction that he didn't want President Trump, who was president at the time, to attend his funeral. Trump didn't, refuse. He designated Mike Pence, who was vice president at the time, to attend to preside over the funeral, but he still accorded John McCain a state funeral. Hichilema could have easily done the same in the case of Zambia. So it's just that we have a president who is not used to having things not go his way, who is forcing things to this extent, because this matter would have long been resolved and would have long been buried in Lusaka if the president had decided to say, look, both culturally and legally, I have no basis for attending the funeral if you don't want me, and I'm going to step aside to allow somebody else who you approve, whether it's the vice president or another state official, to preside over this funeral. It's really the president here personal considerations, and they maybe feel that would be embarrassed to have heads of state coming to Zambia for the funeral of Lungu, and he's not there. That is making him behave this way. But it's a very, very bizarre insistence.
Tit for tat, even in death. Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa is a Zambian historian. Thanks very much for giving us that perspective. It certainly does give us some sense of how things are unfolding now. That appeal has been heard in the High Court in Pretoria this morning, and judgment has been reserved.